What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Well, here we are on the cusp of July. July will be here in a couple of hours. So we're about still, a little more than 6 months away from the primaries. And both the Democratic and Republican primaries. Only the Republican primary is an open one. Of course, Joe Biden has some challenges from Democratic opponents, but more than likely Joe Biden will be renominated very easily. But I still want to make a point about something. The primaries, especially on the Democratic side, the process has become very, very rigged. And to be honest with you, the last two primaries that we've had have been very rigged on the Democratic part. I mean, really, you could argue the whole process in itself is rigged, but it's become blatantly so since 2020. You may recall, December 2019, January 2020, Joe Biden his campaign was dead. It was nearly dead. Remember, he was only polling, what was it, in the teens, low 20s. Remember, the surging candidates at that time were Bernie Sanders. He was the leading candidate. Mike Buttigieg might have been right behind him. Joe Biden was like a distant third or fourth, according to what poll you were looking at. Kamala Harris was only getting like 8-9%. Her campaign was over by early December. And remember, she spent most of her brief presidential campaign attacking her current boss for being a bigot. Remember that? But all of a sudden, all was forgiven when she got the offer for Veep. Just want to throw that in there. But the process was very rigged. It angered me, and I've held this grudge against them since then. You may recall this. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't know about it. Maybe you're too young to even remember it. But from my perspective, it was the most blatantly rigged primary campaign I've ever seen. Bernie Sanders, according to my memory, I think he won the Iowa caucus. Then he won the New Hampshire primary, very convincingly. Then he won the Nevada caucus, I think it was. I can't remember whether it was a caucus or primary. I think it was a caucus. But he won that very, very convincingly, right? But the media, because they didn't want Bernie Sanders to be president, it was all Joe Biden, they were downplaying these victories. Saying, oh, it doesn't really count. It doesn't really count. But this is what they did. They kept acting like South Carolina was the most important primary. Why? Because the traditional Democratic base was in South Carolina, which is not true, because the average state does not have a 60% black population. But they knew black voters were overwhelmingly in favor of Joe Biden. Why? Because he's Obama's right-hand man. Why? I don't know why. I don't know why they say he's his right-hand man. Obama picked him because he had the most, term I want to use, he had the most credentials for white voters. He was, out of the Democratic field at that time, as far as people that, because I think he ran 2008 briefly. But anyway, out of the politicians in Washington that were Democrats, he was the one that had the most conservative credentials at that time. He had been hobnobbing with a lot of Dixiecrats, crossed over the aisle, and worked with many conservative Republicans who were reviled racists like Jesse Helms. So, he's always talked about America, blue collar, and all that, from Scranton, fighting Joe from Scranton, America values. Obama knew who Joe Biden's people were and who he was popular with. That's why he picked them. But because people knew him as Obama's vice president, they thought he's a good white man. So black voters came out in unison, disregarding the issues, disregarding the voting patterns these guys had in the past, disregarding the bills that Joe Biden endorsed or helped to endorse or supported that were so detrimental to the black community over the past 20, 25, 30 years. Never mind all of that. Never mind the fact that he called black children roaches. Never mind all of the racist things that he actually did that hurt the black community. Especially the crime bill, which put hundreds of thousands, if not millions, over the course of decades of black men in prison unfairly in comparison to their Latino and white counterparts. To the point where Hillary Clinton even apologized for that bill when she ran in 2016. Referred to black men as super predators. Remember that, Hillary Clinton? So to see black people come out in unison and vote for Joe Biden out of sheer ignorance, in my opinion, because his name was the one they recognized without doing any real research. I'm sorry, I'm calling it out. Pissed me off to the point where I almost got to the point where I was like, you know what? If this shit blows up in our face, we get the leadership we deserve. And this is when I really despise Trump. But as much as I despise Trump, I loathe Biden even more. But what did they do? Once he won South Carolina overwhelmingly, all of a sudden, this was the win that mattered. This was the win that mattered, and they knew that a series of primaries after South Carolina were going to be in the South, which is heavily African American, which is Biden country. And now all of a sudden, these primaries mattered. But it wasn't even that pissed me off the most. What pissed me off the most was the dirty trick they played. So what happened was you had a meeting with the top Democratic brass. And whatever was said, there had to be some threats made. Or implied threats. Because what you saw then were Amy Klobuchar and Mike Buttigieg drop out. They dropped out while Elizabeth Warren stayed in the race. Now, what was so significant about that? What was so significant about that was Amy Klobuchar and Mike Buttigieg were seen as moderate Democrats. They were getting the moderate vote, which was being split three ways with Joe Biden. But with them out of the picture, Biden was able to consolidate that vote and give him a better chance at winning, a greater than even chance at winning the states, which he could not rely on the black vote. Initially, in certain areas in Texas and California, Sanders did very well with Latino voters, but he could not gain any traction with black voters because of this perception that, he was this old white guy who was from the racist state of Vermont, which is ridiculous. But he couldn't gain any traction with black voters. And to a certain extent, that might have been his fault too. But Warren, who was perceived to be a progressive, even though she's really not, she stayed in the race. So she was splitting the vote with Sanders. She was splitting the progressive vote with Sanders, while Biden was consolidating the moderate vote or conservative vote by himself. So that led to Biden getting off victory over victory after victory after victory, and ultimately becoming the quote-unquote comeback kid. So what dirty trick are they playing this time? Well, remember I told you about how South Carolina and the South are like Biden country? Well, now, from what I've read, never mind Iowa, never mind New Hampshire, never mind Nevada. The first state is going to be South Carolina. So right then and there, they're going to get rid of all of the competition and wrap this thing up as quickly as possible for Joe Biden. Because A, he's 80-something years old. You need to wrap up things as quickly as possible when you got a president that old. And don't want any real competition. Now I ask you this. If you don't think the process is rigged, why is it that RFK Jr., who is polling about 20% nationally, why is it that you see such very little coverage for him? You don't see anybody talking about this guy. Nobody. And then when you do see them talk about him, they call him a nut, they call him a weirdo, a Republican plant. He's maybe an interesting person to talk to, but not presidential timber and all that type of stuff. But the extraordinarily corrupt Chris Christie, who left office with a 14% approval rating, who had one of the biggest scandals in New Jersey political history under his watch, right? Bridgegate. He's presidential timber, though. He could come on MSNBC. He could come on CNN. He could come on Fox News. He's all over the political spectrum. Why? Because no matter how you slant it or how much you cut the cake, he's acceptable to the establishment, whether Republicans or conservatives. Republicans or Democrat, liberal, moderate, conservative, I should say. He's more acceptable. That's why you'll see a Mike Pence who's polling probably like 5%. You'll see Chris Christie who's struggling to get to 3%. But you won't see Marianne Williamson, who's outpolling Christie on the Democratic side. You won't see her because she's outside the political spectrum. This whole process is rigged. It's rigged. And that's why I don't want to tell anybody not to vote. But that's why, me personally, I watch politics because I find it entertaining. Like sports, it's entertaining to watch. But as far as the process actually working for people, everyday people, that's done. That day is done. It's broken. It's going to take... It's going to take something of extraordinary means for the process to be fixed. I'll put it like that. I don't want to say the word on YouTube. But anyway, just wanted to put this out there, man. And by the way, on the Republican side, I'm not going to say that it's rigged, but upon further inspection of the process, I don't think Trump's going to have as easy a time as wrapping up the nomination. Number one, they're obviously out to get this guy. Obviously. Okay? And there may be a third arrest I read about Trump when it comes to charges. At this point, they're trying to get the guy. Like I said, Trump isn't my favorite guy. But at some point, man, you got to look at things for what they are. This is a witch hunt. Also, I looked at the rules this time. You may remember, in 2016, I think almost all, if not all, of the primaries were winner-take-all states, which means that, hell, it didn't matter in a crowded field if Trump only got 35% of the vote. If he got more votes than anybody else in that primary victory in that state, he got all of the delegates, or at least a lion's share of the delegates. But now, at least half of the states, if not more than half of the states, have switched to proportional allotment. And that's going to hurt Trump, because that means if he comes in first in a state, right, And let's say he gets 35% of the vote, and last time somebody else got 26%, and Trump wound up with 90% of the delegates, or 95, or even all of them. This time, due to proportional allotment, he's only going to get a third of the delegates. Second place, the guy's going to get 30% of the delegates, or a quarter of the delegates. So he's not going to be able to rack up these huge leads in the delegate count. So it may be a drawn-out process. Not to mention the fact that he has all these legal things going on over his head, like a sword of Damocles hanging over his head. So at the end of the day, we don't even know if he's going to be part of the political process, period. We don't know. And plus, he's 77 years old. I mean, there's certain realities you got to look at when you have someone that age. But anyway, I just wanted to put this video out there, man. Tell me what you guys think.